Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Emily Kasriel, who's here to share with us her new book, Deep Listening: Transform Your Relationships with Family, Friends, and Foes. Would you like to develop more meaningful and engaging relationships in your life? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. Emily Kasriel is an award-winning journalist, editor, and media executive who worked for over 20 years at the BBC. She developed the deep listening approach during her time as a senior visiting research fellow at King's College London's Policy Institute, building on her expertise as an accredited coach and workplace mediator. A former visiting fellow at Oxford University's Said Business School and a senior advisor to the Skoll Foundation, Kasriel holds master's degrees from the University of Oxford and Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. So welcome to the show, Emily Kasriel.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, Marianne.
Well, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. What inspired you to write Deep Listening?
I think it's a lot of different threads. My dad died when I was 13, and even though there was a lot of kindness, nobody really listened to me. Over 10 years ago, I qualified to be an executive coach on the sidelines of my BBC job and later a mediator, and became more interested in the act of listening. But the real sort of point which made me want to do this is I was leading a big season in the BBC called Crossing Divides, getting the whole of the BBC to tell stories of people engaging across different. And I was trying to brief my colleagues and realised I needed to know more. And that's what started my research and academic research. And in 2022, trained 1,000 people in 100 countries, and started then, writing my book to really learn more and to share what I learned with others.
Well, so can you share with us this 8 path that you have for the book?
Sure. So step 1 is about creating the space. First of all, psychological safety. We need to feel safe to be able to speak honestly and authentically. So if you're in an open plan office, probably not the best place to ask one of your colleagues why they're always late for work. But it's also about the lighting. Side lights, much better than overhead blue-white lights, and the sound. So noisy cafe with a lot of metal and glass, not so good. A bit more wood and materials can make much easier for us all to hear and therefore have a real conversation. But it's also about allowing people to feel really cherished. So I spent time researching Japanese tea ceremonies and finding out about an approach that has evolved over hundreds of years to really make the speaker feel cherished, whether it's a fresh bamboo leaf on the water, or you rotate the mug so that the most beautiful image faces your speaker. And step 2 is about listening to yourself first, because you can't really be in a space to be open to another person if you're all caught up with what's going on inside you. Perhaps the person you're talking to reminds you of your bullying older brother, so you again feel 5 and you're not able to listen to what they have to say. So taking the time to really figure out what your own agenda is, and if there are any shadows going on from your past that you are fighting with that get in the way, and if they might leap up in the middle of your listening, you can again return to being present, which is step 3 about being present. So there's external distractions. Our phone is perhaps the most distracting thing. Even if it's off and got a shiny screen, it still can distract us. So out of sight is so much better when we want to have a real conversation. And I should say that deep listening isn't for everyday conversations. It's for the conversations that matter most, or when we disagree, or we have a relationship that we feel needs repairing. But it's not just external distractions which stop us being present, it's also internal distractions. Are we going to be home in time to pick up the kids from school or watch that game on telly, on TV? So being aware of these distractions and being able to return again to be present and to be present to whatever unfolds. Because step 4 is called being curious, because so often we assume what's ready is going to happen with our conversation. So we pantomime the act of listening while we're preloading our verbal gun with ammunition ready to fire. We treat the speaker as a resource, somebody to extract value from them, or because it's expected. And deep listening is about assuming that we don't already know what they're going to say, about being truly open and understanding that we cannot really know what's going on in their mind. And this curiosity can then give us more information, which can lead to us being empathetic and even developing respect, regardless of whether we agree with what the speaker is saying. And that's what's so important. Listening does not mean agreeing. And once we realize this, we're able to listen to all sorts of people, even in situations where they might believe things which are vehemently opposed to our values. So step 5 is about holding the gaze. So unless you're talking to or listening to a First Nation elder or somebody who's on a spectrum, there's so much research around the importance of holding the gaze. But that doesn't mean gaze like the French philosopher Michel Foucault described, which is a gaze which makes prisoners feel imprisoned by their prison officers. It's a much more warm, empathetic gaze, which is not a hard stare and allows the speaker to go on all sorts of journeys of discovering, and then knowing that you're waiting for them and can then have your gaze window where you're both looking at each other and reconnecting again. Step 6 is hold the silence, because so many of us fear an awkward silence. So we interrupt and we jump in with what we think the speaker is trying to tell us, or with a solution, or how to cheer themselves up. But in fact, a warm, empathetic silence can allow the speaker to unpack a whole new universe of thought so that they understand themselves better, we understand them more clearly, and we both feel more connected. And in fact, we did some research when I trained 1,000 people in 100 countries, and it's just been published in the Journal of Applied Social Psychology, your bedtime reading not. It's quite an academic journal. But it demonstrates that when people practice deep listening, not only do they are able to re-examine their own attitudes and feel more open to connecting at a far deeper level, they also feel it's safer to express themselves and more understood. And it's that connection that we can really allow to unfold when we're holding the silence. In fact, when I train people around the world, whether it's in boardrooms or in conflict zones, people always tell me that silence is something they find hard. And yet, when I return to them after a few months, they say that's made the most difference in their lives. And they found things that they would have never normally known. And that's really exciting. And I think silence also allows you, the listener, to make sense at quite a deep level of what your speaker has said. Because step 7 is about reflecting back. Now, many listeners may have been on active listeners courses where they've learned about reflecting back, paraphrasing. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. That's a very superficial type of reflecting back. In deep listening with reflecting back, which is why you need the silence, it's about summing up the essential core of what the person has said and what they have not said but intimated, and that includes their emotions. And they then might reject it or say, not quite. And one question you can ask them is, tell me more. So it's the place temporarily to park your questions and just iteratively reflecting back to go deeper, which is why step 8 is called going deeper, to unpack that deeper narrative of your speaker, not just what they have to say, but also their values and their motivations.
Well, thank you for taking the time to outline that. What a powerful book. How does deep listening transform relationships both at work and at home?
Well, as I said, so often we assume what the other person has, going to say. So our partner comes home from work, we open the door and we say, "How was your day?" And they go, "Yeah, it was all right." And you just say, "Oh, let me tell you about the problems with the dog and the politics and the garbage and my boss." And we don't truly listen. But if you can take the time and reflect back and say, "I'm sensing that your day didn't go brilliantly," you're then going off script. And because you're going off script, you're inviting them to really share what it was like. And I think that a lot of us really shy away from being with difficult feelings. We feel we need to cheer people up, so we close down the expression of difficult feelings, and people feel dismissed and not truly heard. And this applies particularly to our children. And in a work context, it is so important for all of us, but particularly, the research demonstrates, for those in more power to listen to those with less power. So this both is important in terms of creating that psychological safety so that a leader will know about issues before they really become troublesome, but also to be able to listen to new ideas, new people who may feel shyer and who aren't so open to speaking out, and creating an environment where people feel truly safe to express all sorts of thoughts allows you to have that real conversation. And there's so much research which demonstrates that when people practice really great listening at work, it really transforms the environment. It makes people feel much more loyal towards the company. And the bottom line also is impacted, that the business does better.
In your book, you mentioned that deep listening can even help people feel more connected to themselves. Can you share how that works?
I think it's partly because when you're having a deep listening conversation, in fact, as I'm answering this question now, it's not a question I've been asked before. So you can hear that the whole timbre of my voice is different because I'm actually thinking for real. I'm not just saying something I've said before. And when we start to have these types of conversations, our membrane that separates us and the different parts of ourselves becomes a little bit more permeable. We are having a deeper connection with the other person, but their ideas also permeate ourselves, and we become aware of how we are reacting to them and able, if we can, to separate what their stuff is from what our stuff is, so that we know if we're triggered by someone, it's nothing to do with them. And then we're invited to spend a bit more time exploring why we found a particular conversation so difficult, for example. What is it in our past or in our emotional history which has made that conversation so hard? And in the book, I also include reflection sheets and questions for reflection so that we can begin or continue that such important journey of learning to know ourselves better.
Such an important piece. And in your book, you talk about how deep listening can help us and really get to this place where we can cultivate this lack of judgment and being defensive. How does that work?
That is super hard. And it's even harder when we know we're right, we're in a battle, and it feels catastrophic if we don't win this. We've got to put our point across. And that's why, like in America at the moment, and in many other countries on all sorts of different issues, people are finding it really hard to engage. I think it's about recognizing the humanity in the other person. That is so important. And for example, if you have different political views, a really great question to ask is, what in your life has led you to believe what you do? Because once someone starts to unpack their life journey and what has led to that belief, we can't help but connecting with them on the human level. And when we do so, our defenses go down. And when we introduce more silence and when we are more present, our blood pressure reduces, our heart rate reduces. And what's so exciting is the research from my own work and from others that shows that when people feel truly heard, their attitude extremity also goes down as people become more open to re-examine their own attitudes, and therefore the other person is more likely to be in a situation to listen to you.
Oh, I really love your subtitle, Transform Your Relationships with Family, Friends, and Foes. And I think a lot of times when people think of transforming a relationship with someone that they maybe have a disagreement with, I mean, how difficult is that? And how do we get to a place where we can use deep listening to cultivate better relationships with our foes?
It is hard. And I would say, by the way, that, for example, the step about listening to yourself first that I talked about earlier, and I've got a chapter in the book about, if you've experienced trauma, you may need to get the help of a professional or a therapist. A lot of this work can be hard. But coming back to your question about listening to foes, so many people have in their family people in America who have voted differently and who support different political parties. And this is something that causes them a huge amount of distress. Even within their own family, different generations think differently. And if we can bring that curiosity, if we can momentarily at least park our desire to put our view across and instead listen first and listen openly and listen with curiosity, empathy and respect, the other person is likely to feel and sense that we care about them as a person. We care about their dignity, and therefore they're going to be more likely to want to connect with you. And that feels such an important thing right now. And it's not only polarization, which is such a challenge, but also loneliness. Let me tell you a quick little story. I was in the pharmacy recently picking up some drugs for my daughter, and a lady was sitting in a plastic chair waiting for her own drugs. And the pharmacist asked me for the birth date of my daughter. And I said, 3rd of July, 21. The pharmacist said, "Are you sure?" And then I laughed. I said, "How could I be so silly? She was born in 2001. Whereupon the lady sitting on the chair said, "That's just so silly of you. How could you not know when your daughter was born?" And I replied, "Yeah, you're quite right. That is pretty idiotic of me, given the fact that she's an adult rather than being 4. And we were chatting, the lady in the plastic chair and I, and she talked about her grandmother, and she said she was proud of her. But she said it like, "Yeah, I'm proud of my grandmother because she's just celebrated a milestone birthday in her 90s. And I sensed something else was going on. And I said to her, "I sense that you're proud, but also you have some conflicting feelings." "Yes," she replied, "I think that I'm going to die before my grandmother." And we talked some more, and she started crying, and then she apologized for crying. And I left the pharmacy, and she, presumably went home, and I had a sense that she needed to be heard. No one had really been able to hear her. And so many people in our society are not heard. And if we can be present, as I was, and I'm certainly not always, ask my family, but I was in that moment to pick up on the way she said heard, and it enabled her to be heard and me to feel a connection with her. And because so many of us are grappling with loneliness across society, it may be the only conversation that this woman had that whole day. Who knows? And I really hope that this book can encourage people to listen more deeply to their family and the people most intimately connected with them, to their friends, to their colleagues, but also to strangers, in order to do something to make a dent in the polarization which is infecting so many societies.
Well, what a profound moment you shared with that woman. My goodness. It really says a lot about your work. Deep Listening, I felt, was such a profound read, Emily. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Thank you so much. Well, it would be wonderful if they were to read the book and, for example, gift it or lend it to somebody else so they can practice deep listening with each other, because I'm really able to write in the book at much greater length about some of these ideas we touched upon. But you can also follow me on LinkedIn or go to my website, which is emilykasriel.com.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
You're most welcome. It's been such a pleasure. And thank you so much for reading the book so beautifully, Marianne.
Well, thank you, Emily. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Deep Listening. Transform your relationships with family, friends, and foe. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.